The call that changed everything. Keanu Reeves sat by the window of his quiet Los Angeles home. The night was soft and silent, only the sound of rain touching the glass. He had finished a small independent film 2 weeks earlier, but something inside him felt empty. Fame had given him recognition, but not peace. He often said, the greatest gift is stillness, but that night, stillness felt like loneliness. His phone vibrated on the table. It was late, almost midnight. The name on the screen made his heart skip. It was Sandra Bullock. They hadn't spoken in years, not since their last reunion event when they laughed about the past and promised to stay in touch. But life had drifted them apart again, just like it always did. Keanu answered softly, Sandra? Her voice trembled. Keanu, it's about my brother. He's in the hospital. I didn't know who else to call. Keanu stood up instantly. There was no hesitation, no second thought. Which hospital? He asked. Her silence told him everything. She was scared, maybe even breaking inside. Within minutes, Keanu was in his car, driving through the rain. The city lights blurred against the windshield as he replayed their memories in his mind. Sandra and he had shared something unspoken years ago, during the filming of Speed. Not love exactly, but something close, something rare, built on respect, kindness, and timing that never worked in their favor. When he reached the hospital, he saw her sitting alone in the hallway, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold. Her eyes were red but strong, like someone who had cried and still refused to fall apart. You came. She whispered. Of course I did, Keanu said. Sitting beside her, she told him her brother had suffered a sudden collapse. The doctors were unsure if he would make it through the night. The uncertainty in her voice hit Keanu like a wave. He had known loss. He had lived it. And in that moment, he understood every bit of her pain without needing words. Hours passed. They waited in silence, sometimes exchanging glances that carried years of history. Keanu bought her another coffee, held her hand when she trembled, and said quietly, You're not alone tonight. At 3 a.m., the doctor came out. Sandra stood. Keanu rose beside her. The doctor said her brother was stable but unconscious, and the next 24 hours were critical. Relief and fear mixed on her face. She leaned against the wall, her voice breaking. Thank you for coming, Keanu. I didn't think anyone would answer this late. He smiled gently. You would have done the same, and she knew he was right. When dawn came, light filtered through the hospital windows, painting their faces with soft gold. Keanu hadn't left her side once. He had spoken little, but his presence spoke louder than words. In that silence, something inside both of them shifted. They remembered the kindness that first connected them, the honesty that made their bond real. Maybe life had kept them apart for a reason, but maybe, just maybe, it had brought them back together for another. As the sun rose, Sandra whispered, You never change. Keanu looked at her, his eyes soft but full of meaning. Neither do you, he said. Neither of them knew then that this night the rain, the fear, the waiting would become the beginning of something neither fame nor time could erase. That night, two old souls rediscovered what truly mattered. Not movies, not fame, but being there when someone needs you most. The long night of Memoria's hospital room smelled of antiseptic and quiet hope. Sandra's brother lay surrounded by wires and machines, his breathing steady but fragile. Keanu sat in a corner chair, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the window. Dawn had turned into morning, but neither he nor Sandra had slept. The nurse brought 2 cups of tea. Sandra smiled faintly, thanking her, then looked at Keanu. You didn't have to stay all night, she said softly. Keanu shook his head. Some nights you don't walk away from. Those words made her eyes glisten. For years, she had known him as quiet, almost mysterious, but behind that calm voice, there was always something deeply human, something broken, yet strong. Sandra looked at him for a long time. You've always shown up for people, even when no one sees it. I remember hearing about what you did for your crew on The Matrix. You gave away part of your salary. Keanu gave a small smile. Money doesn't fix everything, but sometimes it helps people breathe a little easier. Her eyes softened. You're still the same. He hesitated, his fingers tracing the rim of the teacup. I try to be. There was silence again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they never said. Sandra leaned back, her voice quiet but heavy with truth. You know, after everything that happened in my life, I realized fame doesn't protect you. People see the smile, the interviews, but they don't see the loneliness after the lights go out. Keanu nodded slowly. I know that feeling, and he did. The years had taught him about loss and isolation, the kind that doesn't end. When people stop asking questions, he remembered Jennifer, the laughter they shared, the child they lost before she even arrived. He remembered the silence that followed, and the way grief became a quiet companion. He turned to Sandra. Sometimes I think pain chooses kind people on purpose. Maybe it knows we'll carry it gently. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. You think pain has a reason? Maybe not a reason, he said softly, but a lesson. For the first time that night, she smiled. Not a perfect Hollywood smile, but a real one, small and trembling. The kind that comes after hours of tears. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. Sunlight painted the hospital garden, where an old man sat feeding birds. Keanu watched him for a while, then said, "Look at that. Even the smallest kindness can bring peace." Sandra followed his gaze, and something in her chest eased. It was like she had been holding her breath for years. Around noon, the doctor returned. "His vitals are improving," he said. "He might wake up soon." Sandra's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Keanu stood beside her, his quiet smile saying everything words couldn't. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice trembling with relief. "I don't know how to repay you." Keanu shook his head gently. "You don't have to. Just promise me something." She looked at him. "What?" He smiled softly. "Don't disappear again." Her laugh broke through the tears. "Deal." As the doctor left, they both sat in silence once more. But it wasn't the silence of sadness, it was peace. To friends, to hearts, carrying years of stories, finally breathing the same calm air again. Before she knew it, she was holding his hand. Not out of romance, not yet, but out of gratitude. Because when life gets dark, sometimes the hand that finds yours isn't new, it's one that's been waiting all along. Asterisk. The promise in the hallway. Hospital hallways grew quieter as the day faded into evening. The doctors changed shifts, lights dimmed, and the echo of footsteps softened. Sandra sat by her brother's bedside, her eyes fixed on the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Keanu stood by the window, watching the rain begin again. She turned to him and whispered, "You've been here more than 20 hours. Don't you need rest?" Keanu smiled faintly. "I'll rest when he wakes up." Her heart ached at the quiet certainty in his voice. She realized something simple yet powerful. He wasn't just here for her brother. He was here for her, and that kind of loyalty was rare. When the nurse entered to check on her brother, Sandra stepped into the hallway with Keanu. She looked tired, but there was light behind her eyes again. "You remember when we were filming Speed?" she asked suddenly. Keanu chuckled softly. "How could I forget? We were running, jumping, pretending to defuse bombs, and you never missed a line." She laughed quietly. "You were always so calm, even when everything was going crazy." He looked down the hallway, his expression thoughtful. "I wasn't calm, I was just trying not to show fear." "That's different," she smiled. "That's you. Always strong, always hiding the storm." There was a pause, and then she asked, "Have you ever felt like you lost too many people to ever be whole again?" His answer came after a moment of silence. "Yes, but sometimes meeting the right person helps you remember that being broken doesn't mean being empty." Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something, but before she could, the doctor approached. "He's responding," the doctor said with a small smile. "He might wake up in a few hours." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. She turned to Keanu, and for a second, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "You stayed long enough for a miracle." Keanu shook his head gently. "The miracle was already here. You just needed to believe it again." She didn't know why, but those words stayed with her long after. Later that night, when her brother's fingers twitched and his eyes fluttered open, Sandra gasped. She rushed to his side, holding his hand. He smiled weakly. "Hey sis," he whispered. Her tears flowed freely, and behind her, Keanu stepped closer but didn't interrupt. He simply stood there, quiet and respectful, the same way he always faced the world, with grace. When her brother fell asleep again, Sandra turned to Keanu, her voice trembling. "Thank you for being here." For everything. Keanu gave her that soft half-smile that always carried more meaning than words. It's what friends do. She shook her head gently. No, Keanu. Friends say they'll be there. You show up. The truth of her words hung between them, quiet and real. As they walked outside for a breath of air, the night smelled of rain and renewal. The city lights reflected off puddles, painting the parking lot in gold and silver. Sandra leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. When this is over, she said softly, we should talk. Not as actors, not as people from the past, but as two souls who made it through something together. Keanu nodded slowly. I'd like that. Their eyes met, and something invisible passed between them, a silent promise, one that didn't need words. He opened the car door for her and said gently, go home, Sandra, rest, I'll be back in the morning. She hesitated. You promise? He smiled. I don't break promises. As she watched his car disappear into the wet city streets, Sandra realized something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from fame or success, but the kind that comes when someone truly stays. A message from the past next morning came with soft sunlight and a new kind of silence. Sandra arrived at the hospital carrying a bag of muffins and 2 cups of coffee. Keanu was already there, sitting by her brother's bed, reading quietly from a small notebook. He looked peaceful, like someone who had found purpose in waiting. You're early, she said gently. He smiled. Couldn't sleep. Hospitals make me think. She handed him a cup. Then maybe coffee will help you think better. They both laughed softly, and for a few minutes, everything felt simple to friends. One quiet morning, and the steady rhythm of a heart monitor reminding them that life goes on. After checking with the doctor, they stepped out for a walk around the hospital garden. The air was fresh, the trees heavy with dew. Sandra looked at Keanu and said, you know, last night, after you left, I remembered something. What's that? He asked. That letter you wrote to me years ago when we finished filming Speed. You said. She paused, trying to recall the words. Some people meet for a moment, but their kindness lasts forever. I kept that letter. Keanu looked surprised. You did. She nodded. It meant something to me. Back then, I thought it was just a kind gesture. But now, sitting here with you again, I realize it wasn't just kindness. It was who you are. Keanu looked down, his voice soft. I never knew it reached you like that. It did, she said. Maybe more than you think. There was a pause, the kind that holds something unspoken. Then Sandra asked quietly, did you ever stop believing in love? Keanu smiled faintly. No. I just stopped expecting it to find me. Her heart ached at the simplicity of his words. She knew what that kind of loneliness felt like, the quiet ache of waiting for something real, something lasting. They sat on a bench, watching a young couple in the distance. The woman was laughing, her hands full of flowers, while the man struggled to tie a balloon that kept slipping away. Keanu chuckled softly. You see that? No matter how much we grow up, love always makes us look a little foolish and a little brave. She added. He turned to her, his eyes warm and thoughtful. Brave, yes. Maybe that's why it's worth it. As the morning went on, Sandra received a message from her brother's nurse. Her brother had woken up again, asking to see her. She ran inside, Keanu following close behind. When they reached the room, her brother smiled weakly. You made a new friend, sis. He joked softly, pointing at Keanu. Old friend, Keanu corrected, smiling. Very old friend. The moment was light, but it carried something deep: hope, laughter, life returning. Later, as Sandra's brother drifted back to sleep, she turned to Keanu. You don't realize it, but you've helped me remember who I was before the noise, before fame, before heartbreak. He looked at her quietly. And who was that? She smiled. Someone who believed in small miracles. Keanu's eyes softened. Then maybe that's why we're both here, to remind each other that they still exist for a while. They said nothing more. But as the day faded, Sandra reached into her bag and handed him a folded piece of paper. What's this? He asked. The letter, she said with a smile. You might want to read what you wrote all those years ago. He unfolded it slowly. His younger handwriting stared back at him, simple, honest words about kindness, respect, and timing. And then, below his old signature, was something new. A line added in Sandra's handwriting. Sometimes, Kindness is the beginning of love you never saw coming. Keanu looked up at her, his eyes shimmering with quiet emotion, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. The truth beneath the silences following week passed slowly, like a film unfolding in quiet frames. Sandra's brother was recovering well, and every day Keanu showed up without being asked. Sometimes he brought flowers, sometimes food, but most of the time, he simply brought presents, the kind of comfort that doesn't need words. One afternoon, while her brother was resting, Sandra invited Keanu to the hospital rooftop cafe. The wind was soft, the city stretched endlessly below them, and for once, they could see the skyline without the noise of cameras or fans. "You know," Sandra began softly, stirring her coffee, "people always talk about how strong you are. They call you the man who never breaks. But sitting here with you, I realize you've been broken. You just learned how to carry it gently." Keanu looked at her quietly. "Maybe strength isn't about never breaking. Maybe it's about choosing to stand up even when the pieces still hurt." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I wish people knew that side of you." He smiled faintly. "Some stories aren't meant to be headlines. They're meant to be lived quietly." There was a pause, filled with wind and memory. Then Sandra looked at him and said, "Do you ever miss her?" He knew who she meant. Jennifer, the love he lost before life had a chance to be kind again. "Every day," he said softly. "But grief doesn't always mean sadness anymore. Sometimes it's just love that has nowhere to go." She reached out and gently touched his hand. "You gave that love somewhere to go, Keanu. You gave it to people who needed hope." He looked at her, and for the first time, his guard seemed to fall. "You always see people clearly, Sandra, even when they don't want to be seen." She smiled. "Maybe that's why we found each other again." The afternoon sun bathed them in gold. And then something unexpected happened. Her brother's nurse came running up the stairs, breathless but smiling. "He's awake," she said. "He's asking for both of you." They hurried downstairs, hearts racing. Inside the room, her brother was sitting upright, weak but smiling. "You're both here," he said. "Good, because I have something to say." Sandra frowned, stepping closer. "What is it?" He looked at her, then at Keanu. "Life's too short to hold back kindness. I don't know what happened between you two before, but I can see something in the way you look at each other. Don't waste it this time." The room went silent. Sandra froze, Keanu too. It was the kind of truth only someone standing near the edge of life dares to speak. Later, after he fell asleep, they walked out to the hospital garden again. The sun was setting, and the sky burned orange. "Your brother's wiser than he looks," Keanu said, trying to lighten the moment. "He always is," Sandra replied softly. "And maybe he's right." Keanu looked at her gently. "About what?" She hesitated, then whispered, "About not wasting this." He didn't answer at first. Then, with a quiet smile, he said, "Then let's not." They stood there, side by side, watching the light fade. Not lovers yet, not quite, but something was changing, something quiet, steady, and real. That night, before she went home, Sandra turned back once more at the hospital door. Keanu was still standing there, watching the stars appear one by one. For the first time in years, her heart didn't ache from the past, it beat with possibility. The night of truth a few weeks later, the hospital corridors that once held fear were now filled with laughter and relief. Sandra's brother had recovered completely and was being discharged that morning. Keanu came early, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. His quiet way of saying, "You made it. You didn't have to bring flowers," Sandra said, smiling as she helped her brother pack. Keanu shrugged softly. "Everyone deserves flowers after surviving something hard." Her brother laughed. "Especially my sister. She survived her own fears." Sandra looked at them both, her heart full. There was something healing about seeing Keanu beside her again, not as a co-star, not as a distant friend, but as someone who had quietly become part of her every day. Later that evening, after her brother was safely home, Sandra asked Keanu to meet her at a small diner near the beach. It was the same place they had once gone to years ago after filming long nights on Speed. The same cracked neon sign, the same smell of coffee and ocean air. She was waiting in a corner booth when he arrived. No cameras, No spotlight, just two souls meeting again where life first began to make sense. Keanu slid into the seat across from her, smiling gently. Déjà vu. More like unfinished business, she replied with a soft laugh. For a while, they talked about everything except what truly mattered. The past, the projects, the jokes. But beneath their words, there was something neither of them wanted to say out loud. Finally, Sandra looked at him. You know what's funny? I used to think life gives second chances only to those who fight for them. Now I think sometimes it gives them to those who simply wait. He leaned forward, his eyes calm but full of meaning. And which one are you, Sandra? The fighter or the one who waited? She smiled sadly. Maybe both. There was a long silence between them, filled with the hum of the old jukebox. Keanu's hand rested on the table, just inches from hers. She looked at it, then at him, and something inside her broke open. The fear, the hesitation, the years of wondering what if, she whispered. When I called you that night, I didn't expect you to come. I just needed to hear your voice one last time. Keanu's eyes softened. And I didn't expect that call to give me back a friend I thought I'd lost forever. Friend, she repeated quietly, her voice trembling. Is that what we still are? He took a slow breath. Maybe that's what we always were to people who cared too much but never said it out loud. Her eyes glistened. And if we said it now? He smiled gently. Then I'd say that caring never stopped. Outside, the waves hit the shore softly, like a heartbeat in the dark. Sandra reached across the table and took his hand. No dramatic music, no grand confession, just quiet honesty. He squeezed her hand gently, his voice low. Thank you for calling that night, Sandra. I didn't know how much I needed to be needed again. She laughed through tears. And thank you for showing up. You turned one of the hardest nights of my life into something beautiful. They sat there until the diner closed, talking about everything and nothing. When they finally walked outside, the sky was full of stars. Keanu looked at her and said softly, I think kindness is a form of love. Maybe the purest one. She nodded. And maybe love is just choosing to show up. Again and again. He smiled, and this time, she didn't look away. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of everything they never needed to explain. As they stood under the streetlight, he brushed a raindrop from her cheek, and she whispered, Thank you for staying. His eyes glimmered with quiet emotion. Always, he said. And in that simple word, years of loss, distance, and unspoken feeling melted into something real, something finally whole.